May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free from harm. May all beings love life. May all beings awaken. Welcome to another Cuke Audio podcast. I'm DC Puba of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, coming to you from sleepy Sanur with Doga Bandita, Feline Cuchita, and dear lovely Katrinka. I pray that you and yours are safe and comfortable and free from economic hardship and able to get out and do whatever it is you want within the limitations of do as little harm as possible, the universal precept. Today we're having a phone chat with Robert Halpern, who I call Bob Halpern. He was an early student of Taizan Maezumi, Shunryu Suzuki, and Chogyam Trungpa. He's going to talk a little about them, about what he's doing now, and he and I were best buddies at the beginning of Tassajara, and we were madmen, but we don't really get into that much. I talk about that in, or I write about that in Tassajara Stories, but anyway, I get a lot more into the stories about Bob, and there are many, 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 many stories about Bob, and he tells some. He's got a gift of gab. And one thing about Bob, since he and I were so close in the early years then, is that we both know some of the same stories. However, we almost always remember them a little differently. I had the same problem with my mother, and but that didn't really come up here, mainly because of my ability to edit. If I said, well, the way I remember it is so-and-so, I sort of took that out. But I can get back at him in Tassajara Stories and tell how I remember it. We'll see about that. One thing I noticed in going over this, and I went over it rather quickly, was, one thing you look for in getting audio ready is pops and clicks. Like one that's really hard for me not to do, I got to be careful, is Cuke Audio. See, I did it right there. I'll leave that one in. And I have to say Cuke Audio, or I have to, be very careful not to pronounce it like I would normally. But I've never had an audio where the person on the other end was having clicks like that. But I noticed a number of them. I took a few out, and then there were just too many. I don't know if they'll come through on your end or not. But for some reason, the audio on Bob's, at least when I was listening to it, would have, at least at some points, some of those clicks. You might not even notice it. There's so much that Bob and I didn't get to. Maybe someday I'll do another one with him. But anyway, this is enough for now. So following the pause to meditate, we'll go right into the phone chat with Robert Halpern. So when you hear the bell, if you wish, hit pause. Meditate or whatever for as long as you wish, and when you're through, hit unpause, and we'll be here to hit the bell to end meditation and go right in to the phone chat with Bob Halpern.
Good morning. Good evening.
Good morning, good evening. How are you doing?
Yes, thank you. And how are you doing?
Good. Good.
Good.
Yeah, I had well, an okay day, just I'm always doing things, but I got a couple hours walk and swim at the beach, and
Great. How far is the beach from home?
10 minutes.
Wow. Do you go every day?
No.
Almost? Why not?
Well, I'm busy.
Good. Good. That's good reason.
Yeah.
That's what they used to say in Japan. Busy is happy.
Ha. That's I never heard that one, but that sounds right. That's definitely right. Yeah. Well. Yeah. No, I get there a few times a week. Katrinka goes every day. She walks.
She's smarter than you.
Yeah, she is. She is.
I know.
I'm just her servant. I get out. I do things. I do. I walk. I swim. See, I can also swim at this villa that's just a 3-minute walk from here.
Is the villa fresh water?
Yeah. Salt
I
water.
see. So then
salt water.
Oh, the villa is also salt water.
Yeah, but it's fresh water salted. That's an alternative to chlorine.
Oh, I see. Yes. Interesting.
Very little. Very little. You can open your eyes underwater. Also, the chlorinated pools here aren't chlorinated a lot like in America, where your eyes hurt for the rest of the day.
Right. Yes.
It's really very subtle. Yeah, America, is run by health departments who insist you dump gallons of chlorine in the pool. Yeah. So, what are you up to these days, Bob?
Of course, I'm living in the lap of luxury. Canada takes care of me because I'm a senior citizen. It's really beautiful here.
Yeah.
It's completely different story from being a senior in the United States, worrying about how you're going to pay for your medical bills or your pharmaceutical bills or whatever,
Yeah, America's a heartless country.
Quite right. Well, I'm just waiting for America to figure out what it's up to and the pandemic to figure out what it's up to, and then I'll make my play.
Yeah. So
I'm just I've been in a holding pattern since I last saw you.
When did Let's see. Did we last see each other in about 1994?
Around then, yes.
Yeah. when you stayed with Elin and me in San Rafael.
That's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah, that was neat. That was neat. Well, I miss you.
Yes, and I miss you. We used to see for a while there. We saw a lot of each other. You know.
Oh yeah.
We were lucky to find ourselves inside the same bottle.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Indeed, indeed.
So I want to ask you before we start. I want to ask you something.
Yeah. Before we start, ha ha. Go on.
So we were lined up to get ordained at the same time, and then I missed out on that.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So what did I miss? What changed after you got ordained in your relationship to Roshi? Yeah.
Oh, Bob, it was so beautiful. Yeah, it was like the sky opened up, and I was floating.
What I mean is, did your relationship with Roshi change?
What? He was dying.
So it didn't change, except for the fact that he got closer to death.
Yeah, actually, I was one of the causes of him dying. I mean, if you look at it, I got ordained, and then he died.
Yeah.
He died.
Good for you.
Like, when did I get ordained? Like, October?
I don't know.
Oh, November, and maybe. God,
November 71? October, November 71?
Yeah, right. I mean, and then I came up from Tassahara. It was in order of seniority. It was Ed, me, Lou, and Angie, and Greg was going to be in on that too, but he dropped out the day before and decided he would follow the path of he had to choose between Zen and the Mayor Bobbitt trip. And that was probably the right thing for him.
So I wonder what happened to I got the robes that were sent for me. So they must have been passed. They must have been passed on to somebody.
Oh yeah, there've been hundreds of people ordained since then. It's like you know what we were like. Elin's father was an astronaut. He was an Apollo 9 astronaut. Yes. So he was a super big shot, right? But now there have been hundreds of them.
Right.
But still, those early ones, they're revered. And having been ordained by Suzuki Roshi, is people think that means I have some understanding or something, right? But I'm just another one of hundreds, actually thousands of people who've been ordained. But anyway, it was, to me, it was just something to do with Suzuki Roshi.
Right. I just asked because although I continued to have a good relationship with Oksan.
Yeah.
Afterwards, and she stayed at my house when she came to Boulder.
Oh, that's great.
And I visited Rinso Inn a few times afterwards.
Oh, that's terrific.
But she did say to me, she kind of sneered at me once that, that I stabbed Roshi in the back by not getting ordained, and I don't mean.
Oh, baloney.
Not that, but that I did something really weird. Although she loved Trungpa Rinpoche.
Yeah. Nah. She didn't hang on to things.
Then I asked you, and now I feel good that I asked you.
Yeah.
To straighten that out for me.
Yeah. No, she wouldn't care. I don't think. Actually, it was your decision not to get ordained. It was not Suzuki's. And, you said, what you told me is that, you just strut around in your robes for a few weeks, and then then you'd start uh, just doing whatever you wanted or something. So you
Well,
recognize,
I don't recall saying that, but I was living with Trungpa Rinpoche, and that was just too exciting for me to leave and go back. You know, he said, "Don't you want to go back now?" You know,
hmm
in the fall of '71, after having lived with him for a few months, you know, in his house.
yeah,
And I said no. And then even when Roshi got sick, he said, "Don't you want to go back right now?" And I said, "No, I'm not worried about Roshi. You're falling apart." You know, he was really distraught by Roshi's the
yeah,
imminence of his death,
right,
and he said, "No, go back." So I missed out on ordination because I was having too much fun.
yeah. All
If you
right,
know what I mean. It was more exciting, a lot more exciting for me. The Rinpoche's exploding new, explosion on the American scene.
hmm
Then Roshi's thing was, it was sort of a brick wall for me. The excitement was gone, and it was just, hard work.
yeah, yeah. Well, whatever you said to me once, as people say things, uh, and and then people who hear them uh, make a lot out of it, but and then the person who said it can't even remember it because they said something else.
Yes, yes.
and
I don't recall saying what you told me I said, but
uh,
I don't recall much.
uh,
And I'm glad that you don't. Today. I'm glad you don't expect me to recall anything
no, that's true.
because you missed your chance. The memory's gone.
Oh, I've got tons from you, Bob. I've got oodles and oodles from you on Cuke.com. Um, uh, yeah, I just want to hear how you're doing now, and tell me what you're
All
doing
right.
now.
I
What are you
I
up to?
want I want. What do I want?
What?
I was asking myself, what do I want? Because you said that was what I was supposed to do. Tell you it's up to what I want, and I don't know what I want.
Well, no.
But it's kind of you to ask.
Yeah. What are you doing these days?
I live in Halifax,
Yeah.
where I've been. I've lived in Halifax more than I've lived in any other place in my life.
Wow. How long have you lived there?
Well, around I guess the move started around the time that Trungpa Rinpoche. Well, no, actually, it started. I visited here, in the '80s with him,
Yeah.
and then went to Japan, and so I started here around 1990.
Yeah. Right.
And then,
Well, you were still
I
living in
went.
Japan in 1990, though, too.
Well, that was where. But what I did was, I think I sold that school in the
Oh, you
end of
did.
1990. Yeah,
You
the one
sold.
in Kyoto, not the one in Kobe.
Yeah.
You remember the one in Kyoto? Yeah, I sold that, and
Yeah.
I came to, and you see, and I came and started to get settled in Halifax. I bought a house,
Right.
etc. And then I went back to Kobe
Right.
later.
And I saw you in both
year.
places because
That's
that's the
right.
period when I was living there. And I remember you went to Halifax and you moved. At some point, you moved your parents there. When was that?
Right. Oh, that was before Kobe. So between the two,
Yeah.
right after I sold the school, we had a couple more children in that period, or two more, and my parents came to be around those births and then ended up staying forever.
Right. Right. I remember one problem you had was for American to move there. There was some problem with getting health insurance, Canadian health insurance.
I'm not sure how correctly I understood it at the time. I wonder if I misunderstood, but I was under the strong impression that not to make a big deal out of it, if they had pre-existing health.
Oh yeah, pre-existing condition.
Exactly, because Canadian government has only one system: free medicine.
Yeah.
You know, and it doesn't have a second system for people that don't quite fit into that category. So either you're a foreigner visiting, you know, depending on your own private insurance, or you're under the Canadian health umbrella.
Uh-huh.
And the problem is that their private insurance dumped them because it's a long story, but my father had some serious health issues, and they investigated, and the Canadian doctor accidentally told the investigator from the American insurance company about some issues that my father had decades before, and they said, aha, okay, we're not paying. So in any case, that was part of my parents being here. The other thing was that they came on a tourist visa, and so they were just here as overstays. And when the Canadian government summons them, and so, you know, I went with them, and I just decided to spill the beans. So, you know, instead of making up a long story, I just said, they're here on a completely overstay, and we knew the law, and it's all my fault. And the Canadian government just kind of ignored it and let them stay. However, I didn't really stay on top of what was going on, and I never tried to figure out how to get them health insurance. So the end of their lives, I was their nurse for both of them.
Yeah.
You know, they both had very long, protracted bedridden situations.
Yeah. You know, you're I remember you telling me your father had an inspiring passing.
Yes, he did.
Mm-hmm.
He had inspiring life. You know, a big turning point in his life was he and my mother both fell in love with Roshi when they met him.
Mm-hmm.
Which at Taizan, you remember them? You were there when they came to visit.
Oh, I remember both of them.
Yeah, in '67. So. Was that right before the first training period?
Let's go, Bob. Let's go back. They fell in love with Roshi. Can you give us any details? Can you set the scene?
The scene was that they were coming to visit me before the first training period, I think.
Oh, really?
Is that
Way
right?
back like in May during the first guest season, which was like 6 weeks.
I guess so, because it couldn't have been during. When did the first training period start?
July 3rd or 4th. July 3rd, I think.
So maybe it was after the first training period.
So all right, the first training period was only 2 months. It was July and August.
I see.
And then in
September. Yeah, it was probably after the first training period, and they came to visit me.
Yeah, so they were there in September.
you know, they weren't impressed with what they weren't extremely familiar with the Zen I had been practicing before that.
Yeah.
You know, they never met Yasutani, nor Maezumi, nor Sasaki Roshi.
Yeah.
And so it was just sort of hearsay, and they weren't sure if it was an extension of taking my acid, you know, my interest in acid, or what.
Yeah.
And so Roshi was their first direct experience, and instead of having to, you know, gradually get used to things and mull over whether or not they're going to accept this new version of their son and his interest, they just immediately fell in love with him. They went to his cabin, and I forget either Roshi told me I didn't have to stay, or my father told me.
Roshi told you.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. It's coming back to me now. And so they stayed for tea, and it went on and on a long time. And outside his cabin, I could hear the two of them, my father and Roshi, laughing. So I knew that everything was going well, and they didn't need to explain to me how much they liked him. And it was interesting that my mother, who was less interested in Asian wisdom than my father, said that she fell in love with him right away, that he reminded her of her own father, who she was deeply in love with, who you know, had been in love with. And she had that kind of feeling with him, even though he was only 10 years older than her. She had that kind of feel. You know, he wasn't, you couldn't pigeonhole him as to how old he was. He was, you know, however old people saw him to be. And so, yeah, and then my father tried to meditate in the Zendo. He went to meditation periods and lectures, and I remember him sitting up, you know, really trying to do a really good job. And he continued to study and practice for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
So that was
just like the rest of us. That's good.
More than me. You know, he was devoted every day for the next 25 years until he died.
He died in 96?
And
oh, wait a minute. No. More than 25.
No.
More than 25.
Right.
Because if that was 67, 25 would be 92.
Yeah, that's about when he died.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
That's right. Yeah. My mother lived another 7 years after he did. So, well, I'm not sure. You know, I don't recall the dates exactly.
Yeah.
I forget the.
Well, that's okay.
I forget the exact dates. Yeah.
Well, that's all right. We're not gonna hold you to that. We're not gonna hold you to that.
That was all right. That was what you asked me about, was the circumstances of my parents. That was their only meeting with him. And it was, you know, made a deep impression, just like a lot of people. So, you know, like you and I found ways of hanging out with Roshi. You know, we weren't shy.
Yeah.
And I had even fewer, you know, qualifications to do something else than you did. You know, so the only thing I had was to hang out with him. And so I never had to share my time with some other important duties at Zen Center.
Yeah.
But looking back, some people had only the briefest of interactions with him,
Mm-hmm.
and it may have been just reading his book or seeing a picture of him or hearing about him or going to one talk.
Yeah.
And that planted a seed that they watered and took care of, and
Yeah.
so it went. And so I feel that I was in the category of the gross category of just trying to max it out in terms of the more the better, quantity rather than quality. And my father was more the type who made the most out of a brief encounter.
Yeah. 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 Well, I think that's a good point. You have both. Now, Reb did what you did too. I mean, and you and Reb, of course, were friends who both came from Minneapolis. But when Reb came to the Zen Center, he glommed onto Roshi. He would go to a lecture. He would sit. He would he would go to every lecture. He would do anything to be near him. He would sit as close as he could to him. And uh, you know, but the difference between Reb and say me, what I always say about Reb is, and he came in like '68, right, driving his hearse in to visit you, and was turned on to it. I've always said that he was an older student than me the day he arrived, because he was focused. He was focused.
He wanted to live in. First, he visited at Tassajara. Then he went back and arranged things to come back out. Around '67, he visited Tassajara.
Oh, is that right?
And then went back to Minneapolis and came out, to arrange his departure from university and all of that.
Yeah.
And then he came back out with that hearse that you mentioned in '68 to live, to move to Zen. But he resolved on that one visit to Tassajara that that's what he wanted to do.
I didn't know that.
So then he came back. Yeah.
Was he at Tassajara to visit you?
Yeah.
And you didn't introduce us. Shame on you. Or maybe you did and I didn't remember it.
Yeah, because he wasn't allowed to stay. I think it was because the first training period was about to begin.
Oh, I see. So he was just in and out.
It was a very brief visit, right?
Yeah.
Well, it hadn't begun yet, but it was soon to begin.
Yeah.
So I think he stayed one night. I don't recall clearly.
Yeah.
In any case, then when he came back, he wanted to live in Zen Center housing, and Dick Baker, wanted to wait and see, whether or not he felt he fit in. And I recall, this is just reflecting on what you said about how he was immediately an older student. Is I told Dick, I said, I think you'll find that he's more suited to this practice than you are.
That's good. That's good. Yeah. Well, so how early were you and Reb friends?
Around grade 7.
Uh-huh.
And then we met each other, but we went to different schools. But his school came over to do some activities at my school, and so we met a little. But then in grade 8 or 9, we were at the same school and same high school, and so then we became quite close friends.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So suppose that was 1957, around then.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I know he took a lot of acid back then, as I recall him.
After I left.
Yeah, I was wondering
So
if you did that.
If I took a lot of acid?
While you were in Minneapolis.
No, I left shortly after high school. My parents moved to California, waited for my graduation. And then immediately moved in '61.
To where?
To Los Angeles.
Uh-huh.
And
Why?
I went out with them, and but then I decided I wanted to go to the University of Minnesota, and I went back that fall and went to University of Minnesota, and then I decided to leave there and go back to California. And so I was in early '62. I left, and so I imagine that Reb discovered acid around the same time that we all did in California, around 65, 60, you know.
Yeah.
63. No, actually, I discovered it in, I think, '63 in California. So he probably, around the same time. But at that time, he was studying at the University of Minnesota, and I was in California.
Mm.
By then, I was in Berkeley.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
So
you were in Berkeley.
Yeah.
Right, but
I was
go on.
in Berkeley and going to school there, but then I left. And
what years were you in Berkeley? I didn't know you went there.
Yeah, around 64. I left Berkeley and went down
64. That's when the big thing happened about, what was it called? The student protest.
Yeah, student revolution. It was called a revolution, student revolution.
Uh-huh.
And I was there during that time.
Oh.
I had a very interesting experience. I owned a beautiful Triumph Bonneville motorcycle with dual carbs and all of that, a really sexy motorcycle.
Yeah.
And shortly before the revolution started, which was the taking of Sproul Hall, the administration building, by Mario Savio and those guys.
Yeah.
Shortly before then, I had knocked off accidentally, I had the bike leaned over while driving a little bit, and the exhaust pipes came off the front. They come out the front and circle around and go out the back.
Mm-hmm.
On those big old motorcycles. And what that left me with was these blue flames coming out of the front of the bike, and it made a noise like a calliope underwater. It changed the sound of the engine because of the lack of these exhaust pipes. And when the revolution started, the Berkeley police needed to have 2 years of college minimum in order to qualify for the Berkeley police. So they were too much wimps to handle the revolution. So the mayor of Berkeley, or the dean of students at the university, called in the Oakland police, who were like LA police, with mirrored sunglasses and riding big Harleys. And they were really tough, ordinary police, with just a high school education. I don't mean to be down on the uneducated here, but in any case, they called in a couple hundred of them to quell the revolution.
Yeah.
And they came riding from Oakland to Berkeley right down Telegraph Avenue, which goes from downtown Oakland right into, eventually, directly to the university.
Right.
And about 6 or 8 blocks before they got to the university, I joined the parade of these hundreds of police riding my strange motorcycle, which was making this ridiculous sound with this blue flames coming out and this loud sound that no one had ever heard, such a strange sound. And I got myself, believe it or not, in between 2 rows of policemen, as if they were my entourage, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I felt that, and the students were lined up to see what was happening on both sides of the streets. So that was the extent to which I was involved with the revolution. I had zero interest in student politics at the time, but I did have an exciting moment there.
Wow.
And then I left to see the world. You know, I had discovered acid and was no longer interested in going to classes. Mm-hmm. And I was going to go to either Africa, but I went to Mexico instead because it was closer. And then I came back and after a little while in Mexico and discovered Zen.
Now wait a minute. While you were in Mexico, you had a guru.
Well, kind of. I wouldn't say guru, but I met somebody who, you know, I was always, I would say that there was, to a certain extent, I had an absent father, you know, emotionally absent with his own psychological ups and downs, a very loving father, but I think that left, you know, he didn't give me a clear father figure image of, you know, how to mold myself. And so I was quite susceptible to looking for big brothers, heroes, father figures, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And I was thoroughly I had never lived out of the city, you know, and I met a true Mexican peasant who, you know, was still quite connected with a lot of his indigenous roots. And he wasn't formally a member of any organization which certified him as a guru, you know.
Yeah.
But to me he was. And so...
Where were you?
That was on the west coast of Mexico in a little fishing village that at that time it had no road there. And so it was quite isolated, and people didn't wear shoes, and there was no electricity, and even the Mexican radio signals didn't reach because of the mountain range near the coast.
How'd you get there?
So how did I find it? It was interesting.
Well, why were you there?
I was in Guadalajara.
Yeah.
And when I first arrived, and I had my old car, a 53 Chevy that I had bought for $50, and it made it all the way there. And in Guadalajara, I asked an American couple where I could find some good grass, marijuana. And they said that they had some and invited me to share it with them. And we were chatting and spending the evening together. And I said I was looking for some place where I could find the real Mexico and away from the big city and all of that. And they said, well, as a matter of fact, we've been living in a village, fishing village, after spending a year there, we're headed back to the United States. And there's a guy there that we think you'll like very much. And if you would like to give us a ride there so that we can say goodbye to him, I can almost guarantee you, they said to me, that he'll invite you to stay.
Mm-hmm.
And that will probably be, they guess what I was looking for. And so I took them up on it and drove the car as close as we could get to there, and then walked in from there, just about a mile or so, or yeah, around that. And I met him, and I didn't speak a single word of Spanish, but somehow I felt I could understand him. And I can remember to this day, and I don't know if he spoke in Latin cognates or exactly what, the sounds of which I could understand, but I remember him saying something like, "Si quieres vivir aquí en México con nosotros, estás bienvenido," and with his warm smile. And so I stayed on, and that's how I found that place. Interestingly enough, while I was there, I suggested that it was on a lagoon. The place was called am I going on too long?
No.
Is this too long? Oh.
No.
So there.
Hey, you were saying the name of it. You stopped in the middle of the name.
Barra de Navidad.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's the reason why you've heard of it is it's since become, there's a 5-star hotel there now with heliport and all of that.
Yeah.
It became a world famous resort, but at the time it was unknown.
What was the man's name?
Juan Becerra.
Mm-hmm.
His name was Juan, and Reb came down looking for me there after I left.
Oh.
And I had written him a postcard or something from there, and he knew where to. That gave him an address of a town, and he went there and he found Juan, and he said, "I'm a friend of Bob's," and Juan said, "I don't know what you're talking about." Evidently, the chemistry between the two of them wasn't ideal, or something, it just didn't click.
Uh-huh.
So Reb left there and went back to Minnesota.
Oh. Uh-huh.
He thought he was going to surprise me, something to that effect,
Uh-huh.
drop in. And so I went back there to that village 8 years later. I was at Zen Center. And
what year?
Every time,
8 years later is what year?
Well, let's see. Wouldn't have been 8 years later. It would have been, 63, 64, 63, let's say. So around 1970, maybe 7 years later.
Uh-huh.
And I had heard early on when I met Roshi, well, I don't know if it was I heard from him, but maybe I heard from Dick, something about that. You remember, you need the abbot's permission to leave Tassajara. Remember that?
Right.
Okay. So I felt that you needed the abbot's permission to leave Zen Center, whether you're at Tassajara or the city center.
That's always nice. That's polite.
Yeah. I thought it was sort of more than polite. I thought it was a rule, that I would have to live by. That if Roshi, that he sort of seemed it was natural. And in any case, a number of times I had asked him, a few times, and he had said, "No, you do not have my permission to leave."
Right.
And so then I wanted to go to Mexico, and Alan Marlowe was considering going to Tibet to live in a cave.
Oh, right.
And so now I had my way of cooking up a story that Roshi, an offer that he couldn't refuse, because I said, Alan wants to go live in a cave in Tibet. And Roshi said, oh, no, that's terrible. And I said, well, before going, he would like to go to Mexico with me and his son, Alex, and on a vacation to Mexico. And maybe if I take him there, I can talk him in. If I go with him, I can talk him out of going to Tibet. And Roshi said, okay, go. So that was when I got my permission to leave. That would seem to be different from just escaping from practice, for some entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
So I went back with Alan and Mike Gilmore.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And and Alex, the four of us.
Yeah, that
in
is
my
neat.
van. You remember that bread truck, that van I had? A big blue.
Oh, yeah.
Big blue van that had been a bread truck.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, I went back in that, and when we got to Mazatlan, you know where that is, right?
Mm-hmm.
On the west coast there. Alan decided he wanted to stay there and enjoy. He didn't want to go continue hunting for a more mysterious, I was going on to see my old friend, right? In Barra de Navidad. But Alan wanted to stay there and enjoy the beach in Mazatlan with his son.
Yeah.
And he said, so I went on with just Mike.
Yeah.
To Barra de Navidad. And by this time, the road had gotten a little closer, but there still was no big hotel there, but things had started to change. And we parked about a kilometer away, and it was at night, and still the village had no electricity. So we decided we would just sleep there that night, and the next morning we would walk in.
Yeah, the first thing I think of is dogs. I wouldn't want to go into there in the night.
Well, here's how it worked. Remember, I had lived there before.
Yeah.
And it was, all the houses were located on a sandbar.
Huh.
And that's why it's called Barra de Navidad, because the sandbar divides the big bay from a lagoon.
Uh-huh.
And so a couple hours after dark, I said to Mike, you stay here. I was thinking of those dogs, because I knew how to get along with the dogs and how to handle those dogs and what their behavior was. If you walked too close to the houses, the dogs would start going crazy. So if you walked too close to the water, you would slosh and make noise. So just to walk where the sand, where the sand was wet, the dogs would allow you to pass in the night. That you were just a villager, going to and from your house, that other strangers didn't know how to follow exactly that pattern, and that would set off the dogs. In any case, I went down walking silently, neither on the water nor close enough to set off the dogs. And there, waiting for me in the middle of the night, was standing Juan, standing there in the dark. There was no moon out that night. And he said, 7 años, ninguna carta. that I had been gone for 7 years and hadn't written. Not even a letter, not even a postcard. And that was rather surprising. I didn't know, because there hadn't been time for any gossip to get to him that I was there, and I hadn't said hello to anybody in the village or near there. Quite surprising. So that was my other time. And at that time, I said to him, I'm now living and studying with a Japanese teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, and maybe you'd like to meet him. You can come back with us. And he said, okay, I'll do that.
Wow.
And a few days later, he said he changed his mind. He said, your Japanese teacher, he's already come this far. He can come a little bit farther. He could come here.
Uh-huh.
Seems to make more sense than me going there. He's already in travel mode from his original situation, so it never happened.
Uh-huh. Ah.
So
how long did you hang out there with that time?
That time with with Mike?
Yeah.
About 10 days.
Oh, really? Uh-huh.
Yeah, and I remember we went to a nearby completely deserted beach to spend a couple of nights, and with one other sort of friend or disciple of Juan.
Yeah.
And Juan was a diver by profession, so to speak. I mean, the people in his village, the men were either fishermen with nets, throw nets, the kind that you put over your elbow and then you toss it and makes a big circle.
Uh-huh.
Or divers for oysters and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And he was a diver. There was no equipment or anything like that. Just hold your breath and go down,
Yeah.
And I had done that. And in any case, we were on a cookout, so to speak, just to spend a couple of nights in this isolated, place. And he and this other fellow caught some lobster. And had a pot to cook them in the boat, and I said I'll pass, and I explained to him about the 3-hand rule in Buddhism about not accepting meat unless there's 3 people between you and the killing of it, and he just rolled with extreme laughter. He had never heard anything so ridiculous in his life.
Yeah. Shame on you.
It just... Hello?
Yeah. So the last thing I heard, that happens incidentally. The last thing I heard was he'd never heard anything.
Was something about my father meeting Roshi?
No. The last thing I heard was, yeah, right.
That's a joke.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry.
What was the last thing you heard?
That was the most ridiculous thing he'd ever heard in his life. Or he laughed like it was the most ridiculous.
That's right. So 7 years earlier, I had gone hunting with him for these giant sea turtles. Once a year, they come ashore to lay their eggs right there.
Yeah.
And on the beach in Bada. And before they do that, the female is very pregnant with a couple hundred eggs in her.
Yeah.
She's huge, and she can float. So at that time, she's there naturally floating. She's so bloated and stuff. And her husband, at that time, can sunbathe with one flipper resting over his mate out in the ocean. It's a perfect time to sneak up on them and dive in the water. Ignore the husband who dives, right? Because you're after the female. She's larger and big, huge, and you can grab a hold of her shell, put the tail down, and with the other hand hold her collar, near her collar, so to speak, the back of the other shell, and that prevents her from diving, and you can steer her. She's paddling furiously with her flippers, and you steer her towards the boat, and that's how you catch them.
They used to do that here. I don't know how they did it, but it's illegal now.
Right. Well, I'm sure it would be illegal now in Mexico too. But in any case,
Yeah.
At that time it wasn't. And then when we got them ashore, the way to each family, there was two families in the boat, and we got one and they got one. And then the way you slaughter that turtle is, we had these giant iron bars that they use for harvesting oysters under the water, to knock them off of rocks, and to bash it on the head, swing it over your head like a 40-pound baseball bat, like a 40-pound sledgehammer, and bash it on the head. And they told me that it was my turn, like an initiation. It's a very common thing that they all did once a year, and it's sort of like a festival that you've caught this giant animal that has 200 eggs in it. And I killed the poor turtle, and afterwards you flip it back on its back again, and for about 2 hours it has residual nervous energy, and its flippers keep going, and the little toddlers think and they're laughing and playing and sitting on it because the turtle still has this life energy in it after it's been killed.
Yeah.
And it was enough to turn me into a vegetarian. I mean, that was the first and last hunting I did in my life. It was,
that's pretty heavy. Yeah.
Quite a remarkable experience to see that thing trying to regain, to be alive after it was dead. You could have a shorter experience with a chicken running around for 30 seconds after its head was cut off.
Mm-hmm.
So in any case, that was my formative experience. But I wanted to come back, leave Mexico, and find, Juan used a lot of indigenous plants and was involved with psychedelics that way. And when I got back to the States, I was interested in finding a way to get high without drugs, something that I think other people had, early Zen students had a similar idea.
Yeah.
And so that's what happened. And then I got interested in, Eastern religions, and I got my bookstore and all that.
Well, how did that happen? How
did I get interested in Eastern religion? Well, I walked into you want me to tell the whole bookstore story?
You
remember it, my bookstore?
Sure, of course.
Well, okay. So I was in L.A. visiting my parents, considering whether or not I was going to go back to Mexico or find something significant to do in California there.
Yeah.
And actually, I was leaning towards Mexico. And so I was in Los Angeles, thinking that maybe from there, visiting my parents, that I would go back to Mexico. But I was walking down Sunset Boulevard, just between where Hollywood meets Beverly Hills, and I wandered into a small bookstore called Satori Bookshop and Gallery.
Uh-huh.
And that was next door to America's first discotheque called Whiskey A Go Go.
Oh, yeah.
And right next door to it, and across the street from it was one of those early all-glass bank buildings,
Mm-hmm.
which had the offices of the lawyers and agents for the movie stars and rock stars. It was, kind of a hub of that kind of entertainment.
Yeah.
And right behind this bookstore was the Hollywood Hills there, where a lot of very wealthy, it's right where Hollywood meets Beverly Hills. So it's an ideal place for movie stars, rock stars to have their mansions. And at the same time, there was this budding hippie thing starting, you know? And so you had a conjunction of cultures happening there, and there was this very small bookstore, and I wandered in there, and I told the guy, the owner, that I was looking for something about meditation, and he suggested Buddhist meditation, and I said, no, I'm sure that's not for me. Because that's not for me, because those guys are kind of, on a very ethical path, and that doesn't sound suitable for me and my background and all that. And he told me, well, you think your background's weird? Let me tell you about a guy named Milarepa.
Oh, that's great.
Who had been an assassin, with black magic before he met his authentic teacher.
Yeah.
And so this gave us stuff to chat about, and we chatted for a couple of hours, and the very next day I went back and we were continuing our conversation, and he said to me, well, I've had it with this bookstore. I think I've been here a year, and I'm ready to go back to India, to my gurus in the Himalayas, because he had identified with that. This fellow had been a composer and also a stockbroker, and had evidently had semi-successful previous, involvements.
Yeah.
And then he had also studied in India, and he wanted to go. The bookstore hadn't been what he had hoped. He had only books from gurus and, mainly Hinduism.
Yeah.
There are also things like, Secret of the Golden Flower by, Carl Gustav Jung, and early Buddhist books, and Evans Wentz books about, Tibet. And so he said to me that he had a certain amount of inventory worth, a few $1,000s, and a few $1,000s worth of debts. And that his red ink and his black ink were about equal. His assets and liabilities were about equal. And he said, we could go across the street to that fancy office building there, and where the owner of this building has his office. And if he'll accept you as the new tenant, I'll sign over the lease to you, and I'll just walk away, and no changing of money. You can have the bookstore, and he'll be out of his obligations. And so the next day, that very same day, we walked across the street, and this extremely wealthy guy who happened to own that building, he also owned a movie production company, and so that little bookstore didn't mean much to him, and so he said, sure. He didn't even hesitate. He didn't ask me for, a bank statement or anything like that. And so suddenly I was the owner of that bookstore.
Yeah.
And that bookstore was like a magnet for people interested in that part of the world, for people interested in Buddhism. You know, I had advanced copies of Three Pillars of Zen,
Uh-huh.
you know, before pre-publication.
Uh-huh.
And I had hand-bound copies of books by Paul Reps that he had brought in by hand, that he had not only self-published, but you know, physically created them by sewing the little books together, including one. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
He was the author of Zen Flesh, Zen Bones, which had already been published, but another book called Zen Telegrams.
Zen Flesh, Zen Bones was very early.
That's right. It had already been published a year earlier. And so that was the teachings of...
more than a year earlier.
Oh, I'm sorry. The paperback came out a year earlier. You're right. The book was published before that.
Yeah.
And that was inspired by the teachings of Nyogen Senzaki.
Yeah.
Although it had some other stuff in the book. No, he died, I think. He died in 1957.
No, he died in 50... Did he die in 1957? His funeral was in 1958.
Pardon?
His funeral was in 1958.
Well, maybe it was delayed because of people coming from Japan. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he died in 1958. Well, in any case, before this book was published. And I recall that date because Suzuki Roshi said that it was sad that he arrived too late to meet him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Arriving a year later. Mm-hmm. And I guess it was Maezumi Roshi came just early enough to meet him. So you're right, he died in 1958.
Oh, Maezumi came there at like 1955. Correction, 1956.
Oh, right. So actually, you know, when I began, I had all these interesting customers, you know, rock stars, some Beatles, one Rolling Stone. The Doors hung out there a few hours every day because they were opening at they were the opening act at the Whiskey A Go-Go. And so I had all these interesting people, but one of them, although I had tasted Maharishi practice and that sort of thing, and one of my friends that I met in the bookstore asked me if I wanted to go to a Zen sesshin, and that was with happening in Ojai, and that was with Maezumi Roshi.
Oh, really?
Excuse me, with Yasutani Roshi.
Yeah.
And so that was my introduction to Zen, was to sit a sesshin with Yasutani. And I forgot where I was going with that. Mm-hmm. You asked me how I got interested. And at that Yasutani sesshin, my fellow students were old people who had been students of Senzaki.
Mm.
You know, they were in their 30s, 40s, 50s.
Yeah.
And so some of them had, you know, been friends with Claude Dallenberg.
Yeah.
But you see the generation that was. But they were not, these were more Southern California people. They were not really the Beat generation.
Right.
If you see what I mean. The Beat generation was not interested in Senzaki.
Because, right. That's, you know, true.
They hadn't discovered him.
Yeah.
And they hadn't really formed themselves yet. You know, it was just an embryonic thing. In any case, so that was, I sat with these people, and the translator at this the two translators that I met at these early Yasutani sessions,
Mm-hmm.
One was at the first one was Taizan Shimano Roshi.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Ado,
yeah.
well, we called him Taizan at the time.
Right.
He was pre-Roshi. It was,
right.
So he was a young monk who was along because he knew English.
Right.
To translate for Yasutani. And then later, at a subsequent session, the translator was Maezumi. And so then I made my connection with Maezumi, and later he was the priest for a Japanese community there at Zensuji in Los Angeles.
Well, he was an assistant. He was an assistant priest there, yeah.
That's right. And I talked him into leaving.
Good for you.
And started because he was more interested in using his English and in meditation and in all of that, and he wasn't very fulfilled with what he was doing.
Yeah, he tried to get them to start. He wanted to start a sitting group at Zensuji, and
he did.
It
was once a week.
Yeah, well, they wouldn't let. He was frustrated. It wasn't what he wanted.
That's right. I sat with him once, like Tuesday evenings. It was a once a week thing, and it wasn't really. And I said to him, "Let's get a house, and you can live there, and we can get hippies to come and sit with us." Because I had already on one of my sessions, I had already visited Suzuki Roshi, because I went up to Mill Valley to sit a Yasutani session, and then before going back to Los Angeles, I went to meet Suzuki Roshi.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was, and then I went back to Los Angeles after meeting him, and at that time suggested, I'm a little mixed up. I forget when we moved into that house in LA. In any case,
I think it might have been 64 or 65.
65. I think 65 I met Suzuki Roshi, and then I went back to Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was getting ready to wind down that bookstore, and I was living with Maezumi in this house, and Suzuki Roshi came to visit to go to a conference of some sort at Zensuji about, total teachers in North America.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the guest of honor, and I was quite taken with him. The first visit didn't do much for me, although I spent about 40 minutes. He, chatted with me in his office at Sokoji.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe an hour, I don't know, but he wasn't. He was very welcoming and chatty, but it didn't blow me away because of my expectations of what a Zen. I'd only spent time with Yasutani in his lectures and in his Doksans interviews, and so those were where he acted in a very formal manner. You can imagine his. Did you ever see him delivering his Teisho, his formal lectures?
Yeah, he was dramatic.
Yeah, exactly. And so Suzuki Roshi was not dramatic. In my meeting with him, he was so ordinary, right? He didn't quite fit the bill.
Right.
But when he came to visit, his subtleties made a deeper impression on me. And then I decided to start visiting San Francisco to go to sessions there.
Wait a minute. Let's take a look at when he came to visit and you met him again.
What happened there?
Yeah.
Well, specifically what happened was, I was interested in macrobiotics at the time, and I was eating a strict vegetarian diet, sort of. Macrobiotics wasn't formally completely vegetarian. It had other philosophical ways of figuring out what to eat. In any case, he was the guest of honor, and Maezumi, I was helping him cook, because he was the only guest, Roshi, coming to eat dinner with Maezumi and me.
Did Charlene? What was his wife's name? Charlene?
Yeah, Charlene. But she wasn't at that. I think she was visiting her family or something. She wasn't at the meal.
Yeah. Okay.
And so Maezumi Sensei cooked a meal for him, which included some beef, a vegetable, rice and a vegetable dish with some beef in it. And at the meal, I passed on that because it didn't meet my criterion of purity or whatever. And Roshi said to me, "Don't you eat meat?" And I said to him, "Well, sometimes." Excuse me. And he said, without skipping a beat, he just softly said, "Sometimes I eat rice." And the conversation continued. But later, that little phrase kept circulating around in my brain. What kind of language is that? What did he mean? And it had a surprisingly strong effect on me, almost like it was a koan or something that took root in me, and I had this interest in. So I started wanting to go up to San Francisco when there was a sesshin. I think there was 2 a year then. Weren't there? And so I went to 2 or 3 of those. And I remember the first one I went to, I had this kind of a skirt. I was so interested in maintaining my lotus as much as I could that I had this thing that was sort of like I wrapped around my waist, so that I wouldn't be inhibited by blue jeans and crossing my legs.
Right.
And I wanted to be as athletic and perfect as possible. And I went up there, and the first night, was the session started on a Saturday, and on Friday night they had the movies, the samurai movies in Sokoji.
Yeah.
And I went in. I just wandered in, and I went to the Zendo where nothing was happening. It was just dark, and I decided I would sleep there. And then I would be there at 5 a.m. or whenever the thing started the next morning.
Yeah.
I forget exactly what time. And the next morning, around 4:30, Roshi comes in, to make himself some tea or get ready for the sesshin. And on his way to the kitchen, he passed me and he woke me up and said, "You're not supposed to be here." And so that was the second powerful meeting with him. Another thing of my going to be, enlightenment or bust, and to be his best student ever, and to be told that I was off on a wrong start. And so, he wasn't angry. It was just clarifying things. And so I forget where I don't recall where I continued to stay. In any case, I decided to move there, and he welcomed me, and I decided to move to San Francisco, and I asked Maezumi Roshi for permission to leave, and he couldn't refuse. I was just speedy, and probably wouldn't have taken no for an answer, but he didn't say no. He said yes. It was very generous of him because he, simply acknowledged that, yes, it was a wonderful opportunity to be able to practice with Suzuki Roshi. So I kind of abandoned him without even giving it. I never thought of it that way. I was just, looking forward, not backward, at what I was leaving. But I did find somebody else to take over and live there in my stead, to pay the rent. And so then that was before the first, just around so I went from there to Tassajara.
Yeah.
Where I met you.
Yeah.
Before the first training period.
Right.
So there you have the whole history.
But why don't you tell about the first time you met Suzuki?
The first time I met him was, I said to this fellow sweeping the stairs out front, "Are you Suzuki Roshi?" It was Katagiri Sensei. And he said, "No, he's inside." And he took me to Roshi's, was in his office, and Katagiri showed me the way, and I was with my friend, and Roshi invited us in, and we sat there, and he explained, we asked him some questions about what's the practice like here, and he explained about people came and sat with him there, and he talked to us about that there was a plan to start something called Tassajara down the road. No, he didn't say Tassajara, but he said some of my students would like to have a country situation for intensive practice, which I don't think is necessary, but they want to do it, so it's fine with me. He said from his point of view that you could practice wholeheartedly in the city, and that would be quite fine. And sky's the limit in terms of Buddhism. You could go all the way, that you could have a complete Buddhist life in the city. But because his students were interested, he said he would go. He was intending to go along with it. And the rest were just sort of small talk. And I don't think he did mention something about the sessions, and I felt, in terms of what practice in San Francisco was like, and he didn't seem to have any interest in the fact, that he didn't ask me any questions about, what was Yasutani's practice like, or, what did the students do, or what kind of a, community is involved there. He didn't have any interest in that. But I did ask him some questions about Zen Center and its practice. And so I felt, later I knew when I was interested in going back north to San Francisco, I knew that the sessions existed. And then after the first or second session, Dick Baker, I still had my bookstore, and Dick Baker brought me some Avalon Ballroom posters for fundraisers for Tassajara, and wanted me to help do that, but I never followed through. you know. I didn't really feel beholden to Dick and have much interest in his enthusiasms. I didn't really make a connection about how, you know, how it would be serving Roshi to do such a thing. I thought it would just sort of be serving Dick.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I didn't really have a clear image of how important that was, you know, in terms of getting Tasahara started. And so that's about all I recall of that first meeting with Roshi.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Except something that I told you before is that I picture him so vividly with his sleeves tied up behind his neck, you know, so that he could do work around the house, around the temple, and sitting in his chair, in his desk chair, with his hands clasped, you know, with his fingers clasped behind his head, with his elbows up in the air, sort of leaning back and talking to me in a very relaxed way, and his legs crossed in a conventional one leg over the other, like you do when, you know, sitting in a chair. And I thought that was it was too sissy-like, and it was too ladylike, and it wasn't fierce and warrior-like that I had grown accustomed to thinking, you know, from the theatrics of Yasutani Roshi. And I even remember that he didn't have any hair on his legs, you know, and I was looking for a father figure, and he wasn't quite fitting the bill. And I sort of felt that I was meeting a nice old man. That was my first impression. But the information that I got, plus the fact that I was more struck with his presence that when he came to visit in Los Angeles, and plus the information that there existed a Zen center and a place where I could practice regularly, even though we had begun to have regular practice at our little situation in Los Angeles, I was excited about, and even though I had already tasted sashins, somehow I became, well, I guess I was enamored with the idea of being able to study and practice in San Francisco. And I think actually I moved into the flat with Jeannie Campbell. Before going to Tasahara. So I actually, you know, lived on Bush Street there for a while in 1820 Bush, I think it was.
I don't think that happened until after Tasahara.
Jeannie Campbell's place?
Right across from Zen Center. Was she living there then?
Yeah, she was there wasn't Zen Center housing yet. It was just one flat. Instead of a group of flats, a row.
Oh, okay, yeah.
In other words, yeah, that group of houses hadn't yet got started yet.
Yeah.
It was just in the energy was just beginning to happen, because, you know, this was such a pivotal time with Roshi because of the Avalon Ballroom and all that stuff, you know, that the Roshi and Zen Center becoming well known, that there was a growth spurt happening.
Yeah.
Remember? When you and I were part of that growth spurt. Of a sort of a second wave, like we having various waves of the pandemic. we were having various waves of interest in Zen. We weren't the Paul Alexander wave by any means, right?
You mean, well, Paul Alexander, who came like in 1959 or 60.
Right. He's sort of like those animals that sense that start moving because the tsunami's coming, that they feel the earthquake before anybody else.
Uh-huh.
Paul recognized something early on. So when we were still knee-high to a grasshopper, you and me. So anyway, that's the whole history of me and Zen Center. The rest, you know, the rest is history. I studied there until I left to go to Colorado to study with Trungpa Rinpoche.
Did anything else interesting happen while you were around the Zen Center?
Well, the most interesting thing was witnessing the meeting of Trungpa Rinpoche and Suzuki Roshi was the most moving thing for me that happened while I was at Zen Center. The other most interesting thing was watching Tassajara go from a resort to a monastery.
Uh-huh.
And the other interesting thing was the purchase of Page Street, you know, the birth of that. And another interesting thing was to watch Roshi's escape from the Japanese congregation, his involvement there, and meeting my dear friends like you at Zen Center. You know, it made a lifetime deep impression on me. And I would say that the important things that happened were, you know, so many because they were in our formative years that the weight of those moments made such deep impression. You know, I would say that a week at Zen Center, you know, might have as many deep impressions as a year or 10 years of my life nowadays. I recall Roshi saying that when you're younger is when things change in your life. When you're older, you will just do your best to deepen those important experiences you had in your youth. You recall that?
No, but that's good.
So now I'm older, and when you ask about was things memorable, things were deeply memorable. You know that's when you know, I was trying to shift from my parents' worldview and finding my own worldview and understanding of life, who I am, and all of that stuff. And so that's when I guess began to say, who am I? That sort of thing. Although I had been interested in Hinduism and Zen before meeting Roshi, it certainly was at a deeper level because Tassajara was my, you know, a completely new level because it was more intense practice. Not only more intense, but it was, for me, you know, those sessions that I went to were sort of like holding my breath and jumping underwater, whereas Tassajara is more like swimming. When you hold your breath, it's holding your breath underwater to see how long you can survive. It's not really like swimming. It's another experience. It's what do you call it? It's a extreme challenge. whereas Tassajara was spread out over the days and allowed things to sink in deeper.
Yeah, spread out over months.
Yeah,
years.
not just Tassajara, but my whole experience at Zen Center was like that.
Yeah,
Spread out. It went on from day to day, and that's what made me so antsy sometimes to escape and get away, because it was unrelenting. Very slowly, the screws kept tightening. I remember. Do you remember Tatsugami's talking about the cheesecloth?
The what cloth?
That, like a cheesecloth. That if you can picture this, you remember him explaining that? That the monastery, the way he explained it was that we put you in this cheesecloth and we squeeze, and then some of you will pop, squeeze out and fall out, and then we catch you and put you back in the top again. The process of processing students, putting you under some pressure, but the job of the monastery is to make sure that it doesn't quite kill you. And so, but I never believed quite that applied to me too. So that I thought that I might get squeezed out and be the first failure, one of the first failures of the whole process. So that in terms of my, that's why I felt that so excited to meet Trungpa Rinpoche, because he made it so clear that he wasn't just interested in helping people develop a monastic practice, but all sorts, every conceivable kind of practice fit under the umbrella that he was offering.
I remember you left Tassajara because you had to...
I was kicked out. If I remember, I was kicked out with you the first time.
Well, they just asked us to skip a practice period and come back.
I understand. I took it, I talked to Roshi. I took it as a what do you call it? As like an award.
Right.
Yeah. That we would be, he thought that we would be good to have us skip a practice period would be a good sort of experimenting in this American experiment of planting this alternation between monastic and lay life and all of that.
Right. They wanted to get us out of Tassajara too, so we wouldn't be disruptive. And then, but I had to come back. I had to come back and run the dining room. There was no, that was and then in the third, so 67, 68, in the third summer, when I told Peter Schneider that I was going to skip the second half of the summer running the dining room, he told me I couldn't do that, and I said, no, I'm going to go to Monterey and study Japanese, and he said, if you do that, you'll never be able to come back to Tassajara again. I said, nah, that doesn't work. That's what he said. Well, he was bluffing. I said, no, and Suzuki Roshi didn't want me to
Peter
go
doing?
Either. He's doing great.
Yes, that's good. He must be about, about 82 now? 83?
Yeah, something like that. He and Jane have the Northridge Zen Center in L.A., and, they were in Japan like 22 years, and now they've been back that long, I think.
Yes. They visited me in Japan a couple of times, and I credit myself as the matchmaker who pushed them to become an item, pushed both of them.
That happened at Tassajara, so how did you do that?
I approached both of them saying that what they needed in their life was one another.
Huh.
I just had a bug in my bonnet, that they would complete each other. And that was, I don't recall before or after ever meddling in other people's romances like that.
Well, you were sure right. I mean, they've had about the tightest relationship. They've been together since like what, 68?
As far as I know, there was no indication of them being an item before I started bugging them.
Well, it happened very early, and so they've been together over 50 years. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. And I remember you had the Satori shop. You were selling posters there, those psychedelic posters, right?
Well, one thing I did in terms of posters was Ronald Reagan had just been elected governor of California.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine and I took a few people had made these giant black and white pictures of movie stars. Remember those?
Uh-huh.
Those kind of posters? Well, what we did was we took a movie poster of Humphrey Bogart holding a gun and photoshopped, which didn't exist then, we cut out and pasted Ronald Reagan's head over Humphrey Bogart's face. And so it was a picture of Ronald Reagan holding a gun with a balloon, the dialogue bubble coming out of his mouth saying, "Tanks for the vote, suckers." Tanks,
right.
Like the way gangsters talked. And that got in Time magazine. And the FBI visited me at the bookstore. And they wanted to inquire into my motivations, because the biggest customer for that particular poster, yes, I sold various kinds of posters, but that biggest poster, the biggest customer was the Student Nonviolent Coordinating SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, that you may have been a member of.
Well, yeah, I was
in any case,
with them.
Their branch at UCLA was the biggest single customer for that poster. They wanted to, buy them and put them up all over because they were so anti-Reagan. So when after the FBI asked me what was my involvement, and I said I just wanted to make money, they said, "Fine, goodbye." And that was the end of that. Bill Graham bought me posters, and I bought them, and that was straightforward. But I think maybe I never, maybe I forgot to pay Dick Baker for those Bill Graham type posters, that he brought. He had a couple of them. I don't recall, but I remember Dick was upset with me. Maybe that was I didn't pay my bill. I don't recall clearly, but my dealings with him were straightforward, no problem. I left the bookstore simply by giving it away the way somebody had given it to me. And so there was no, to go to Tassajara, I just needed Dick's permission. That was the only thing that stood, and that at first he said, well, we're going to see whether or not you fit in here. You haven't been a regular member of Zen Center. You're just coming from Los Angeles. And it was very a few days later, he said, "You can stay."
Maybe the guy who owned the building or somebody was supposed to pay you for the book.
I think I had hopes that I would get money from the guy, and then I just wrote it off and said, instead of seeing it that way, I'm going to see it that I gave it away the way somebody gave it to me. I thought that maybe, at first I thought I would do better than he had done. You know, he walked away from the bookstore without a nickel, just got out from underneath the lease. I did the same thing, but I thought I might profit, but the guy never came through, so I just wrote it off as a bad debt.
You know what I remember you saying is that
What's
you
that?
went to him, and that you had some agreement that he was going to pay you for the books and stuff, and then he said to you, "Well, gee, Bob, do you have anything on paper?"
Well, maybe something like that, vaguely. What happened was that actually between the Whiskey A Go Go and this bookstore was a place called Hamburger Hamlet, and which was actually one of the most well-known restaurants probably the most well-known restaurant in West Los Angeles. And that what he did was he had no interest in this fellow lost interest in the bookstore altogether, and he changed it to Leather Hamlet. And the name of the little store, and you can still see it on YouTube. You know, if you go to, what do you call it? Yeah, if you look for pictures of, I once looked on YouTube for something like Los Angeles and West Hollywood in the early 60s or something like that. In any case, you're right. There was something about that fellow. I can't even remember his name, but I didn't make a killing or anything. I just went. The way I considered in my mind was that at first I thought that I would leave the bookstore experience with also some cash, but the cash part never worked out. So in my mind, I just figured I left it the way I came in. Just like Donald Trump came in a crook and left a crook, we hope.
Now, I want to move to, you did need money, you did need to work, or you decided to, and you became an iron worker in the city, and you were living at Zen Center or near Zen Center, and being an iron worker. There was Chris Flynn, and I don't know who else.
And Mike Ford, was that his name? Mike.
Tim Ford? Tim Ford?
No. His name was, he was a friend of Dick's. What was his name? He was early. He had been there for a few years, and he was kind of an artist. I forget his name. Anyway, there was a few of us. I think I was before. I was about the third one, and second or third one, and it ended up being about 6 or 7 of us over time tried it, and it was very interesting because, at that time, wasn't Tasahara $1 a day, something like that?
Well, I don't know, maybe not that cheap, but it wasn't much.
Well, I think that if you were, that was like the minimum or something, that as long as
for a student,
to be a student rather than not a guest student, but accepted as a student. Something that Dick had said something about you have to pay something, but we should be almost free, like a monastery. In any case, to stay and live in San Francisco, I guess we did need money, and whatever little money I had ran out, and so I think that's the first job I got was as a iron worker, and that was in a crooked union, which was so interested in keeping blacks and Mexicans out of the union that it bent over backwards to make it easy for white people to sort of avoid the irregular apprentice situation and get journeyman's wages right
So
off.
you were an affirmative action hire.
In reverse.
Well, affirmative action for white people.
Right, exactly. So, anyways, I was to maintain the purity, the racial purity of the union, and I was just generally part of that thing. And so we were able to get journeyman's wages early on, and therefore that was $6 an hour, time and a half for overtime, double for Saturdays, and triple time for Sundays. So
wow.
Occasionally, if you could work on a Sunday, you would get $18 an hour, which was a lot of money in those days.
Yeah.
And that the way it worked was you could just say, I'm not going to work tomorrow. And a month later, you could call up the foreman and say, of this company or that company, and say, do you have anything for me? And he'd say, yes, be it the Bank of America tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. And you just show up on the job. And that was ideal for a Zen student who wanted to, make money whenever he needed to make money.
Yeah.
So obviously not every day was working. Those Sundays were, I only experienced that twice in my career, 2 or 3 times in my career. But basically that $6 an hour basic pay was quite good.
Yeah.
So I didn't work a lot there, but it was crazy, insane work where a lot of the people took speed in the morning. Sometimes the foreman would hand out little pills for people, pep pills, because he was paid by how much iron was laid per man per day. He got bonuses. And so then they would hand out tranquilizers after lunch to help people come down.
Oh,
I didn't go the pill route, but it was insane. Over the period of time that I worked there, I saw 2 different times I saw somebody die on the job from an accident. And the accidents were from people pushing things too hard, not being careful, being too aggressive about their approach to the work.
Yeah, you had a lot of stories. It made an impression on me, and you're really good at heights.
Oh yeah.
You are. You're incredibly good at heights, and I'm not, man. I don't even like to be near a height.
Do you know that I used to show off on the heights and working on these skyscrapers, that I used to get a kick out of impressing the other iron workers who thought that I was such a crazy daredevil and all that. But when my wife got pregnant the first time, biologically I acquired a normal fear of heights.
Oh.
I suddenly felt that I had a life that I had to, I had to keep living. I related to the rest of the universe in terms of that there was going to be a little baby that I was responsible for.
Yeah.
And that I couldn't be. It just seemed I had a different feeling. Now I guess now that my children are grown up, I'm kind of a daredevil again. I go out on the roof of my building without any fear when I'm standing towards the edge of it.
Yeah. Huh. I don't like to do that. I always feel like I'm being sucked off.
That's your encountering your death wish.
Yes. Right.
So, but you've got the ocean to go swimming with.
I like that. And I like every once in a while we'll go down to a nice place at night, and if we live, there's a reef out there, so the water's fairly calm inside. It's not like swimming in the ocean, you know. It's swimming inside the reef.
I have the ocean right outside my window. You know.
Oh yeah.
Halifax is a harbor, and I have a little crummy beach near my house, just a few minutes from my house. But I have to keep my head out because I don't trust the quality of the water. You know, they used to say that Halifax had an antiquated sewage system that made the water, you know, biologically unsafe for bathing, and the city claimed to have solved that problem. But I still don't trust the ocean-going, you know, container ships about what they're leaking into the water, because they come in and out of the harbor all the time. Mm-hmm. So I've got the water right outside, and I do love ocean, you know, winter skinny dipping.
Wow, but no kidding.
Yes, I've had to replace it, but the water's not safe for dunking your head, and it probably is safe, but it just gives me doubt, and so instead I take ice cold shower every morning. That's how, you know, the water is much colder here than it in the winter than it is where you are.
Ha! It's not cold here. Well, it is if you get out in the ocean some places. Yeah, it can get sort of cold in the ocean, but inside the reef it'll get a little cool sometimes.
Well, I remember Roshi giving me his blessing when when we used to go in the Taizan Creek in the spring there with the melting snow.
Right.
Coming out of the sauna, it was quite easy. It was quite refreshing and easy to go into the cold water after coming out of the bath or the sauna. And he said to me, he used to do that when he was younger, but that his time for that had passed.
Well, so I don't do that anymore either. But you do,
but
huh? Far out.
I do. I still do. Yeah.
Wow.
And I would say during the pandemia, you know, that I really slacked off on exercising. For years, I played competitive badminton at the local university.
Oh, really?
You know, with seniors, you see, with people my age, you know.
Yeah.
But that was and then all that was closed. That was indoor, of course, and so that was all closed down when the pandemic began, and I became a really couch potato, and I just hung out in my place. And I would say that I'm quite grateful for my daily ice cold shower. Was quite invigorating in lieu of exercise.
I
also, for about 12 years, I've taken classes at Dalhousie, the neighbor, university. So I went there every day because I enjoyed being around, cute young girls and boys, and the fun of taking various classes and a lot of language classes. And I would ride there and back. And so I had daily bicycle rides
that's neat.
Every day. And so that sort of kept me in shape, and all that and plus I played that badminton, and all that sort of disappeared with the pandemic. And there's the history of my athletic life recently. But yes.
Yeah. What was it going to? Oh, you were leading a meditation group there for years.
About 12 years. It was 3 times a day, 7 days a week, except on weekends it was only once a day. And I did that, and there was never, the practice happened every single session for all that time. It was never canceled by me because of something. Either I got somebody else to do it for me, or I did it myself, but occasionally it was canceled because there was some other program going on in a conflict, and there was 3 shrine rooms in 3 zendos in that building, and occasionally nothing was available. But there was quite a streak, and then it came to an end shortly before the pandemic, and so then we began practicing a couple years before the pandemic. Actually, it came to an end, and we began practicing with my neighbors here in where I live, because I live in a building that has a number of people interested in meditation, and so for a few years we practiced every day in my living room, set up like a little zendo. But we stopped doing that because of the pandemic, and we haven't yet resumed. Some strange reason we had inertia keeping us going, and then inertia making it hard to get started again.
Well, I understand. Now, you were with the original few people who lived in 340 Page. Correction, 300 Page. The city center. After it was bought, before other people lived there, before the move.
I think there was 3 of us that went.
Yeah.
Jack Weller, myself, and a woman. I forget exactly. It's 2 or 3 of us that went to be the first people to live there. And I remember there was a woman living there, like a janitor caretaker.
She was a caretaker.
Right. And
she's somebody who came with the building that left before everybody moved in.
That's right. And
she lived
sometime.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Did she live in the room on the first floor behind the office?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think so. And I lived downstairs near the door on Laguna Street. I had a choice of any place in the building, where I wanted to live. And I would sometimes have a date, a girlfriend, and want to sneak her in. And so that way, by living down there, and also we could use the fire escape sometime. I had various things to try to sneak in I had a couple of girls I knew from the neighborhood, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, cool.
And I didn't, but I couldn't, I felt I couldn't get into that with the caretaker. So I had to keep that a secret if I had a date.
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, it was a Jewish woman's home, so the caretaker was probably an older conservative person.
Well, it had nothing to do with that Jewish thing had long finished,
Oh, yeah?
And I think the building had been vacant for some time, and that woman was sort of, maybe hired by the real estate people who were, in charge of selling the building.
I see. Yeah.
She wasn't connected with the former administration.
Emmanuel.
But in any case, I felt that I was, I had to be careful because I didn't want to besmirch Zen Center's reputation.
Oh, right.
That I was, might be, it might, if I was bad behavior, might reflect poorly on all of us.
Right. How thoughtful. Anyway, you wanted to get away with it. And
exactly.
So you lived there. Now, wait a minute. I want to ask you, did you live right by the door in that little room that's the room. It's on the very bottom corner of the building.
Yes, yes.
Oh, that's a small. That's not the men's dorm. That's just a storage room for Zendo stuff. Huh.
I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is now, but I
just told you.
No. I mean, I don't know what it was then.
Oh, yeah.
But I think it was just an empty room, and somehow somebody brought over a truckload of tatami early on, and I put a tatami in there. I put a tatami, and that made it a bedroom. There was no. Well, I take it back. Maybe I moved there later, because didn't we do construction from the get-go early on? We were doing construction in the shrine room, in the Zendo downstairs. So I forget quite.
Yeah. But anyway, you were there. Jack Weller was there. It was just the two of you, huh? Didn't Nils ever live in it?
He came soon after. He just wasn't the very,
Yeah.
I remember there was a few weeks, maybe a month or so, where maybe it was just Jack and myself. But I thought there was a woman. Was Jane Snyder? No, wouldn't have been her.
She was at Tassajara. I was at Tassajara.
Right. So, no, it wasn't a woman at first. That's right. That's right. It was probably just Jack and myself.
Yeah.
And
I wasn't in Tassajara. I was in Monterey.
That's right.
That's right. Yeah. You came and visited me. Well,
David, David, I have a question before I lose you. So are you going to make an audio book out of Crooked Cucumber?
Yeah, sure. That's what we're doing. I'm working on it with somebody now. God, I just read the whole book, man.
I listened to the whole book.
What do you think?
Well, I just asked the question.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the audio book.
I'm the one. Whether or not you remember, in 1995, I asked you to please do this, to make an audio book. Do you remember?
Well, I didn't have Crooked Cucumber then. Crooked Cucumber came out in '99.
Okay, when you were working on it, I asked you to make an audio. When you interviewed me back in those early days, when you were working on it.
Yeah, that was probably '95 to make an audio
book.
And
I asked you to make the audio book of it, but you didn't have much interest in it then, and I said audio books are going to become a big deal. I just listened to President Obama deliver a beautiful narration of his audiobook.
Wow. Yeah.
He did 29 hours it took to read that 700-page book.
Oh my God.
He did a beautiful narration. Usually when the author does an audiobook, they often do the abridged version and give the unabridged version to a professional who can sit there for, long hours. But he did the whole thing. If I remember correctly, I believe Michelle also did the audiobook of Becoming, her book. So
they both got great voices.
Pardon?
I said they both got great voices.
Yes, that's true. He even, at one point, early on in the book, he's recounting the sole brief conversation he had with his father. Only one conversation. His father visited once, visited Honolulu, I think. And he does a great African accent. Like a professional narrator when he's recounting this conversation he had with his father.
Oh, that's neat.
In any case, so I want to ask you another question about how about a Spanish translation?
Oh, well, that's up to somebody else.
You mean you have nothing to do with that?
No.
You've sold the rights completely?
No, I never had them. Look, it just came out in Japanese a year ago.
Yeah.
and I was very involved with getting it in Japanese.
I see. So how did I remember? I remember you telling me how Hoitsu-sama was unimpressed or disappointed by the Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind in Japanese by the translation.
Oh, but that's not true anymore. There's a new translation.
I understand. So of that book, there's a proper translation of Zen
Oh,
Mind?
yeah. Now, when I say the new translation of Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind is a good translation that I'm happy with, I'm relying on the opinion of others. My feeble Japanese, with that, I'm not qualified to give my own personal opinion, but the opinions of people I respect, like Kazuaki, Tanahashi, and others, I hear very good things about it. And the family, like Shunryu Suzuki's son, Hoitsu Suzuki.
And so are you happy with the Crooked Cucumber Japanese translation?
Sticking in a comment here because there was a glitch in the recording, and it will just be a minute, and then you'll hear when it goes back to Bob and me. Yes, I'm very satisfied with the translation. Again, not that I am qualified to judge Japanese translation, but because of the feedback I've gotten from some people who've read it, some Japanese, but which has been very positive, but also the quality of the people who were working on it. And Hoitsu was involved, Akiba, Gengo Akiba, who was Bishop of Soto Zen in America, he went over it for, as an advisor. Fujita, who was in America, head of the international section, Isho Fujita. And anyway, yes. And yeah, like I said, Hoitsu, he was involved with it.
Wonderful.
He had to approve of everything. I was involved with it. I was in constant contact with them, and no, they were good people.
So how come?
And I'll never see a cent from it, but I put a lot of time into it.
Forgetting the money for a moment, how come you say you would have nothing to do with the possibility of a Spanish translation?
Well,
what?
No,
Why don't you have
if somebody
any
wants to translate into Spanish, great.
You mean you don't know anybody who might want to do that? I'm not talking about whether or not you might make money from it. I'm not talking about it as a business deal. I'm talking about it.
No, I'm not either. I'm just saying it's not on the table. If somebody wants to do it, great. Look, I'm very, very busy. I cannot keep up with what I'm doing. So, it's an idea now, and you'll probably I'll be thinking of it. I mean, I know some Mexican practitioners, and I've got some people. If it's going to happen, somebody will get hold of me about it.
Well,
but I have people get hold of me with ideas like that, and I say, great, do it.
I just mean the time that we English was beginning to be a home for the Dharma when we started practicing. It was an early stage, and now Spanish, which has more native speakers of Spanish than there are of English. Did you know that?
No.
There are more people for whom Spanish is their mother tongue than English. Of course, people speak English as a second language, but the people who speak what they speak at home, there are more Hispanohablantes than Anglohablantes in the world. And it's really beginning to flourish, and there's a few lamas and roshis, etc., who, speak in their broken Spanish, etc. It's like the way Roshi spoke in his imperfect English. And so it's an embryonic period, and I would really love to see for them to have the image of Roshi to guide them as they're acquiring.
Oh, well, Zen Mind Beginner's Mind is in Spanish. It's had several translations.
I know, but I'm talking about Crooked Cucumber. I'm just reminding you that because for some people, that kind of book is more suitable to get them, established on their path than a book of pure teachings.
Okay. Bob, I'll get right on it. I want to ask you another question.
Okay.
Or I want to tell you something. I remember, I just remember this great story that you were coming home from work and to the Page Street building, and you came home from work, and there were it was a bad neighborhood. It was a dangerous neighborhood.
Okay, I remember the story. I'll tell you the story. What happened?
All right.
It was one day I got a big paycheck because there was some of that weekend bonus.
Yeah.
So I got a paycheck, which was like $1,800 for a week, something like that, okay? A huge paycheck.
Yeah.
And I cashed it at a bank downtown into cash. And I was coming home, and I decided to take a bus instead of the trolley so that I would have a little bit less of a walk, because I could get off one block away from Zen Center.
Yeah.
And then walk through the neighborhood, as you said, was known to be a little bit rough.
Yeah, but you were used to walking through it.
Yes, but now I had $1,800. I had $1,800 cash in my pocket, and so I wanted to, not dilly-dally, and I wanted to get home, without fooling around too much in the neighborhood, obviously. So I got off, and immediately, who falls in behind me, one on each side, like at each of my elbows, is two young teenagers, big guys, maybe about 17 to 19 years old.
Yeah.
And I started to walk, and they said, hi, or something, and tried to get my attention. The name of that other guy who was the iron worker was Hal Thor, F-O-R-E.
Oh, yeah, Hal Thor, right.
Right, that was the fellow. Anyway, because once I was with Hal Thor, and a couple of young dudes from the neighborhood came up to roll us, right? Hal Thor and I were standing there, and Hal just kicked one guy in the nuts and turned around and we ran. So he acted quickly. I was really amazed. He didn't hesitate. He just smelled what was happening, and he lashed out and kicked the guy in the nuts, maybe in the shin. I didn't quite notice. But we just ran safely. We got away. Another time I was with Claude Dallenberg, and a couple of guys came up and asked us for money. And Claude gave them some, and we got away. So I was familiar with, being rolled on the street. And so these guys fell in when I got off the bus, and I was going home around 5 p.m. or so. And so then they said, we just want to talk. And one took an arm, and I yanked my arm away, and I started running away from these guys, and they were chasing me. And I ran really fast, and I ran up the stairs of Page Street, and a woman was going in just ahead of me. And I called her, another Zen student, and I called her name as she was just before the door was closing on her, I reached in my back pocket and I took out the envelope and I handed it and I said, "Here, hold this for me." And then I turned around and I didn't have a care in the world because I no longer had nothing to lose. They couldn't steal my money now. So I turned around and I said, "Hi, guys." And they were really taken aback because their prey that they were hunting suddenly stopped and said, "Here I am."
Yeah.
And so we sat there on the steps of Zen Center for about a half an hour. And finally, at the end of half an hour, I got them to admit that they were going to try to get the money from me. At first, they completely, for the first 25 minutes, they didn't know what I was talking about. We just wanted to chat with you. That's the story that you're referring to, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. Well, that's a great story, and I love to hear it again. So then you went off with Rinpoche, and you were in Japan, and then Nova Scotia, and now you're talking with me.
Yes. And I'll tell you, David, that my feeling about Roshi and Rinpoche was that because Rinpoche had left something in the UK which was sort of a failure, it hadn't worked out the way he had hoped,
Uh-huh.
He had hoped to plant the true practice of Dharma, and he ran into a lot of Buddhist society formalism, interested in scholastic degrees and all that stuff, and robes and titles, and they didn't really want to hear about the essence of the Buddha Dharma, and for various reasons, it didn't work out well. Then he went to North America, and he wasn't sure, without a penny in his pocket, and he wasn't sure what was going to happen. And he had, driven into a joke shop, which, paralyzed him.
Oh, he drove into a joke shop?
That's how he got half paralyzed was that car accident coincidentally happened to be a joke shop. But you could say that his experimentation, with alcohol and all of that to such great excess was, sort of semi-suicidal. Flirting with on the brink of physical disaster and all of that. That my feeling was, and that Roshi, on the other hand, nursing his aging body through all of those coughing spells that he had towards the end, the last few years, and all of his, perpetually, body difficulties, which had come from that bad post-war diet and all the other stuff.
Yeah.
That having to hand things over to Dick Baker, who he knew much better than us, what a gamble that was.
Yeah.
In terms of the future. And my feeling about the meeting of Roshi and Rinpoche was that having met each other and Rinpoche seeing that Roshi had proved it could be done. What he dreamed of doing, Roshi was already doing.
Yeah.
Having people practice without making false promises, without luring the students in that way. So having met each other, Rinpoche could live and Roshi could die. In my talking with Roshi, I felt that he really pinned a lot of hopes for the future that he wouldn't see, that on Rinpoche, that he really felt very strongly about, Rinpoche and his students, and Rinpoche protecting the seed that he had planted.
Uh-huh.
I had watched him over the years reacting slightly, like he could care less about Taizan Tulku, for example, who had the same guru as Trungpa Rinpoche back in Tibet, exact same lineage.
Is that right?
Yeah, his name is Jame Section Control. And but that Roshi had no interest in him. It wasn't, but about the love affair between Roshi and Rinpoche.
Yeah.
So, in any case, I really feel that promoted an easier passing for Roshi. Knowing that Rinpoche was around, and he had such intense interest in knowing about which of his students were interested in going to Colorado, etc.
Yeah.
So that was.
Well,
I don't know if I discussed that with you before, but I felt that probably that you already knew that's how I felt.
No, I've never heard you state. Well, I can never say I've never. I can only say I do not recall you stating that before, but I think I would have remembered. But that's very interesting. And so, here we are continuing to course through the Prajna Paramita because of having met these great teachers. Are you still there, Bob?
Yes. I was just waiting for you to finish that sentence.
Yeah.
Well, I guess you did. Here we are, having met, coursing through the Prajna Paramita, having met these great teachers, comma.
No, period.
Oh, period. Okay. Yes, here we are. I'm sorry, I thought it was a comma.
That's funny. Well, I think your soliloquy on the Roshi Rinpoche relationship is a good place to.
Okay, you had enough. I give you my blessing if you want to wind this down.
And if you have anything else, you'd like to say, I'm game.
Well, I would like to say that I think that Roshi loved no one more than he loved you.
Ha.
I don't know if I ever told you about that, but I could tell from talking to him, and his interest in you was familial. It wasn't, as one of his dear students. It went beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
His interest in you, and likewise, Oksan feeling about you, that they adopted you, so to speak.
Huh. They were not, he was not hard on me. Roshi didn't do the teacher stuff with me, like not talk to me for a year or whatever. Yeah. And Diane too. Now Dia, my first wife, he'd say to her that, I'm a bad teacher for you because you're like a granddaughter to me.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I just want to mention that I don't know if I ever mentioned, I don't think I ever mentioned it to you, but, I talked to him about various people, and I talked to him about you, and I could feel, the temperature change. That I just thought that you should know that before the pandemic gets me.
Before it gets me, Well, that's
Oh,
very nice to hear, Bob. I don't have any thought. Like, I don't think about,
right.
I don't have any idea like that. So that's nice to hear. Uh, he liked you too. And so did Rinpoche. They both liked you a lot.
Yes. Uh, I'll tell you who else. I'll tell you somebody else he really liked was Trudy. You know that, right?
Yeah, sure.
Uh, so, so you're not the only one that he liked.
No, he made everybody feel uh, like
Yes, I'm
uh,
not talking.
really accepted and understood, and that's. I've heard that so many times from people. I never met anybody who understood me or accepted me. I was just telling Katrinka about that, and I said, that never occurred to me. Uh, I never, I never felt like uh, people didn't understand me or accept me or anything. But it's amazing how many people say that sort of thing.
So you know that so many people in the modern age said that I sat there in that lecture and I felt that he was talking to me,
Oh, right.
right?
Absolutely.
So that the poetics that is used in the sutras about that gift uh, is that when Buddha spoke, all the people from these different tribes and different regional languages, everybody understood him equally. You see,
Mm-hmm.
they even talk about that quality, and the Buddha is in the sutras, and they use a different way of approaching it, as if he had some, linguistic super ability. But it's actually, probably in a large crowd, they were only getting darshan. They weren't. He was so far away, they probably couldn't even hear what he was saying,
Yeah.
because they didn't have a microphone or anything. But in any case, that idea of he's speaking directly to me, and it's really I understand him and he understands me, is a very old thing. That it's a you could say a quality of an enlightened teacher.
Hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I feel right now that you're talking directly to me, so you've got that quality too.
Well, I am
And
talking to
I
you
have
now.
I have a cat here too that I live with. His name is Moses,
Nice name.
and he's the most adorable guy in the world. He's kept me company during this whole pandemic, and
Oh.
I went to adopt him at the adoption place. They have a very
Yeah.
nice. It's like a little cat apartment. You see the cat's living situation before they're not in a cage or anything,
Oh, yeah.
and
Oh.
it's like a intermediary place where they keep the cats for a week or two, and that you can go and play with them and see which one you want.
Uh-huh.
I had no idea of getting a cat. I've always been a dog person, but I can't have one in the building I live in.
Oh, yeah.
And I went with friends because their grandkids wanted to go just see the cats. And I went along for the ride, and I came home as the owner of one. And his name, they picked them up because somebody had died, or the cat, escaped from home and got lost, or who knows what. But they acquired them, and temporarily they give him a name, and the name had been Rambo. But I changed it to Moses,
Yeah.
and he sends his best to you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I think Moses is an excellent choice. Moses was a great, wise person. Uh,
That's right. It's a Egyptian name, Moses. It means drawn from the waters. His
oh, that's
daughter.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good
So
name.
do you have a dog?
Yeah. Yeah.
I forgot the dog's name. I saw it on Facebook. What's the dog's name?
I talk about her a lot in the
Yes.
Life in
In
Bali
the podcast.
podcast.
Oh.
As a matter of fact, every podcast I do, I either begin or end or sometimes both.
I know, and that's why I'm asking
saying,
you to remind me.
Coming to you from Sleepy Sanur with Doggett Bandita, Feline Cuchita,
That's
and
right.
Dear Lovely Katrinka.
That's what I was asking for the reminder of.
Uh-huh.
Yes. Well, David, it's been a great pleasure talking with you.
Me too.
And thank you very much for reviving some of these old memories.
Oh, we could have just gone on forever.
I know, but it's after midnight for you.
Yeah, it's like 12:30. Yeah, but well worth it. It's really great talking with you. Reb will want to know. Whenever I talk with you, I let Reb know.
Okay, so love to you, to Katrinka, and to the animals. Okay.
Yes.
Take good care of yourself.
Yeah. And
okay.
Love to you, and it's wonderful talking with you.
Have you been recording this? I thought you were going to tell me when you were going to start recording.
Oh, you're funny.
Okay. Yeah. Well, keep up the good work.
Yeah.
And
well, thank you. I'll do my best. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
So get a good night's sleep.
Yeah.
Don't let the bed bugs bite.
No. And very good talking with you, and we'll be in touch. I always appreciate your notes. And till we meet again.
Okay, till then. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. So thank you very much, Bob Halpern. Really appreciated your joining us here on Cuke Audio. Also, thank you for listening and writing me little comments sometimes. I will do my best to please you, Bob. So, I would like now, before departing, to give thanks to our sponsor, which is you, our dear listeners. Thank you for helping us stay afloat here. We depend on donations to keep going, not only with Cuke Audio, but with Cuke Archives, and there are some wonderful volunteers and associates I work with, and I really appreciate it. But I appreciate those of you who participate by Dana Paramita. The perfection of giving. There's two wheels to the monastery. The practice wheel and the economic wheel. And there's the same thing with Cuke Archives. So if you feel so moved, just go to the homepage of cuke.com, and there's a link up top near the bottom for donate. And you just click on that, go to the donate page, and that'll show you how to write a check, make a PayPal contribution, or become a PayPal subscriber for as little as $1 a month. It's easy to do. Thank you very much. So this has been a Cuke Audio podcast. I'm DC Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, coming to you, as was indicated earlier on, twice, from Sleepy Sanur with Doggett Pandita, Feline Cochita, and dear lovely Katrinka. We're wishing you and yours and all of us a grand awakening.